The cabin in the woods. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway. Sarah, her boyfriend Mark, and their two friends, Lisa and Tom, had rented a cabin deep in the woods of upstate New York. The place was a little rundown, but it was cheap, and the isolation was exactly what they were looking for. No cell service, no distractions, just nature and each other. The first day was perfect. They arrived at the cabin in the early afternoon, unpacked, and spent the rest of the day hiking through the woods. The air was crisp, the leaves were beginning to change color, and they didn't see another soul the entire time. It was exactly what they needed after months of work and city life. As the sun set, they built a fire outside the cabin, roasted marshmallows, and shared stories. The dense forest around them grew darker and more mysterious, but it felt cozy and safe within the circle of firelight. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. They laughed, drank, and forgot about everything but the moment. But as the night wore on and the fire began to die down, Lisa started to feel uneasy. It was a subtle feeling at first, just a nagging sense that something was off. She didn't say anything at first, not wanting to ruin the mood. But then she noticed something. Out of the corner of her eye, in the shadows just beyond the firelight, she thought she saw movement. She turned her head quickly, but there was nothing there. "What's up?" Tom asked, noticing her sudden silence. "Nothing," Lisa replied, forcing a smile. "Just thought I saw something, but it's probably nothing." Sarah, always the practical one, laughed. "Probably just a deer. We're in the middle of the woods, after all." Lisa nodded, trying to brush off the feeling. But as the conversation continued, she couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched. And she wasn't the only one. Tom, who had been quiet for the last few minutes, finally spoke up. "Do you guys hear that?" he asked, looking around. "Hear what?" Mark asked, frowning. "Listen," Tom insisted, his voice low. They all fell silent, straining to hear whatever had caught Tom's attention. At first, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the night, the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl. But then, there was something else, something faint but unmistakable. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. It was slow, deliberate, and it was getting closer. "Probably just an animal," Sarah said, though she sounded less certain now. "No," Tom said, shaking his head. "That's not an animal. That's someone walking." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air as they all stared into the darkness, trying to see what was making the noise. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until it sounded like whoever, or whatever, was just outside the circle of light. Mark, trying to be brave, stood up and grabbed a flashlight from the cabin. "I'll check it out," he said, trying to sound confident. But his voice shook just a little. "Be careful," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Mark switched on the flashlight and shone it into the trees. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there, no animal, no person, just the thick, impenetrable woods. The footsteps had stopped. "It's nothing," Mark said, lowering the flashlight. But just as he turned to walk back to the fire, the footsteps started again, this time, running toward them. "Get inside!" Sarah screamed, her voice high with panic. They all bolted for the cabin, slamming the door shut behind them. Mark locked it, then pulled the curtains over the windows. They stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the door, waiting for whatever was out there to try to break in. But the footsteps stopped again, just as suddenly as they had started. The only sound now was their own breathing and the pounding of their hearts. "What the hell was that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Tom replied, his face pale. "But I don't think we should stay here." "We're not leaving in the middle of the night," Mark said firmly. "We'll wait until morning." They huddled together in the center of the cabin, keeping the lights off, hoping that whatever was out there would go away. but the feeling of being watched never left them. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside made them jump. Hours passed, and slowly, the fear gave way to exhaustion. They didn't sleep, but they were too tired to stay fully alert. Just before dawn, the footsteps started again, this time on the porch. They heard the creak of the wooden boards, the sound of something brushing against the door. They held their breath, waiting for it to try to break in. But instead, it did something far worse. It started to scratch at the door. Long, slow scratches, like nails on a chalkboard, ran down the wooden surface. The sound was unbearable, sending shivers down their spines. They covered their ears, trying to block it out, but the scratching only grew louder, more frantic. It felt like it was trying to claw its way inside. Suddenly, it stopped. For a few moments, there was silence. Then they heard it, a voice, low and guttural, whispering through the door, "Let me in." The whisper sent a wave of terror through the group. Sarah clutched Mark's arm, tears streaming down her face. "We need to get out of here," she sobbed, but before they could move, the door handle began to turn, slowly, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. The lock held, but the handle continued to rattle, the door shaking on its hinges. But before they could move, the door handle began to turn, slowly, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. The lock held, but the handle continued to rattle, the door shaking on its hinges. Mark grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle, backing away as if the door might burst open at any moment. The rattling continued, more violent now, the whole door shuddering under the force. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. They waited, not daring to move, their eyes locked on the door. Minutes passed, and nothing happened. No footsteps, no scratching, no whispers. Just silence. Cautiously, Mark approached the door, listening for any sound from outside. When he heard nothing, he slowly unlocked the door and inched it open, just enough to peek outside. The porch was empty. He opened the door wider, stepping out into the early morning light. The forest was still, the air cool and crisp. It was as if nothing had happened. But when he looked down, his blood ran cold. The porch was covered in deep, jagged scratches, like something had tried to claw its way inside. And in the dirt at the bottom of the steps, there were footprints, bare, human footprints, that led off into the woods. Mark quickly went back inside and told the others what he had seen. They didn't waste any time gathering their things and getting out of there. As they drove away, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that whatever had stalked them through the night was still out there, hiding in the trees. They never spoke about what happened at the cabin again. But none of them ever returned to the woods, and the memory of that night haunted them for years to come. They knew that some places were meant to be left alone and that whatever had been out there, whatever had tried to get inside, was something far beyond their understanding, a darkness that they had narrowly escaped, but would never forget.